Welcome to this session, which focuses on student experiences of the concerns process. And I'm here with John Lim, who's a former student of the University of Nottingham, who studied social work a year or two ago. And he's here to talk about his experiences as a social work student of being in the concerns process, what he learned from it, and how he dealt with it. So, John, over to you. Do you want to start by saying a little bit about yourself and your studies at the University of Nottingham?
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me, Andrew. It's really nice to see you again. So as Andrew has said, I studied at the University of Nottingham from 2016 to 2019. So I graduated last year and moved back to Singapore after that to start working as a social worker. So, a little background history. I lived in Singapore all my life for 21 years and only moved to Nottingham for the period of my bachelor's degree in social work. So it was a great experience there.
Great. And you've gone back to work as a social worker in Singapore, haven't you, John?
Yeah. So currently I work in this place called a family service center. So it's a bit like a local GP for social services in that it receives cases from all sorts of different client groups, so ranging from young children to adults to the elderly, ranging from different problems like mental health, domestic violence, or even something like financial assistance. So we see the whole gamut of social problems and we try to provide casework management and counseling to them. Yeah.
Thanks, John. That's really interesting and quite different from social work in the UK. Let's talk a bit about your experiences of the concerns process then. And I know you're very happy to talk about that, John, aren't you? You're happy to share your experiences. But can you start by telling us a little bit about when you went into the concerns process, during your placement and the background to that?
Yeah. So, Andrew, you probably know this. I didn't just go through one concerns process. I went through two concerns process in the span of 2 months. So a little background. The first concerns process happened after 2 weeks when I was working with the local authority. And it was largely because during a multi-agency meeting, I had asked the service user's caregiver about what she felt the local authority could provide for her. And when my supervisor heard about that, she felt that I was not being representative of the local authority's stance on not promising too much. And she felt that was very concerning. So that was the first. The second one was because I hadn't followed up on some of the actions that my supervisor was asking me to do. She felt like I wasn't up to speed on the work. And it was also because during a session, I had used this kit bag with a service user without asking for permission. So she felt like she felt like there were some concerns there. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So that was two experiences of the concerns process, and this is in your final placement, wasn't it, John?
Yeah.
And if it's not a stupid question, how did it feel when you went into the concerns process?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Andrew. I think that's a difficult question because there's this whole mix of feelings, right? Like you come back on a skills day. I'm not sure if you all will still do that in COVID, but you come out on a skills day and you hear your friends talking about these great experiences they've had on placement. And then there's you who is going through the concerns process. So I felt really ashamed. I felt like there wasn't anyone I could speak to about it. And I felt like nobody could really understand what I feel. At the same time, I felt really, really angry. I was feeling like I had put so much effort into coming into this placement, and then there was my supervisor who was like holding me up for all these things. So it was not easy for me not to take it personally, because it felt like a personal attack. Like I mean, essentially what it's saying to me was like, John, you're just not good enough as a social worker. I mean, we have to put you through the consent process. So for me, I was really angry. But I guess the underlying feeling was probably that of fear, right? Like, you feel like you're gonna fail, and you just don't want that to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember, John, the conversations we had at the time about, your fear of failing and what that felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think really interesting to hear about how isolating the fact that it's hard to talk about it to other students if on the surface they all seem to be having perfectly fine placements.
Yeah.
So you got through it, John, and you passed your placement, and you ended up completing the course. Yeah. How did you do that? What helped you to manage the feelings you spoke about and get through it?
Yeah. I think probably the first one was yourself, Andrew, and like, you helped me to get through it. so I guess like on a bigger note, I mean, it's the professional support, right? Because quite importantly, you're not alone in this process. Your university tutor wants you to pass. I mean, Andrew probably didn't want to see me for another year, and he probably also wanted to do his best to help me, and I really appreciated that. Like, he always made himself available to call, and he was always there, like mediating between my supervisor and myself, and trying to improve the tense relationship. So I really appreciated that. And I think it was also for me, the commitment to self-care. So it was during that time that I started accessing the university counseling services as well, which was very important to help me to see that, well, this thing, however scary it is still something you can manage. And I have to tell you the truth, like, having two consents process was very, very anxiety provoking. There were nights before review meetings where I just couldn't sleep, and I thought, like, oh my gosh, like, what if I failed? what would happen? And I think lastly, it's probably a celebration of this progress that I had made. It's easy to forget, right, in the midst of the consents process, like, how to come as a social work student. And I think it's very easy to just throw in the towel and say, I give up. I don't want to do this anymore. And I mean, it was tempting for me to do that, but it was helpful for me just to, like, celebrate like the small victories each day, and to say, like, hey, John, today I met a service user and I managed to talk to her, listen to her needs, and do a good assessment. So I think it's little things like that that keep you going even during this difficult process.
Yeah, thanks, John. You spoke about the review sort of meetings, and that's basically where we have a look and see if you've met the outcomes that we'd set you to do to kind of address the concerns. How do you think you changed what you did in response to the kind of concerns that were raised? Do you think of any things that you did that in response to the concerns to sort of ensure that you met what your practice educator was asking you to do?
Yeah, I remember there were so many changes that I did based on the review processes. So I mean, that was a really helpful process, and I think for me, what was most helpful was you, Andrew. I think you asked this question, like, you told me, like, I could ask my supervisor that, how can I help you to be sure that I'm meeting the PCF, right? So the next day, I actually went to my supervisor, sat with her, went through the PCF, and told her, like, what are you not too sure about my competencies and how can I help you to be sure. So that was a major shift in terms of how I practice that helped me to be better. So like things like diversity, I mean, those were the PCF competencies that I felt like I hadn't done very well in, and that I needed my supervisor's advice or suggestions on how I could help better. But it's about understanding like where you need to be and how you will get there. And that conversation with you, Andrew, helped me a lot.
It's nice to hear, John. I'm glad that was helpful. But it also sounded like you went back and talked to your supervisor and made sure you understood what she needed as well.
Yeah.
So looking back on sort of the concerns process, John, is there anything you've learned from it and you think actually I maybe would do that differently in the future?
Yeah. I think, you know, for me, the consents process was a very humbling process, because the previous year at my first student placement, I was working at a hostel for the homeless, and there I had been nominated for Student Social Worker of the Year. And for me, that felt like, oh, like I was like technically quite competent. So coming to this and then going through 2 consents process, I think what I took away was that I didn't know everything and that I needed to ask. Because social work is a difficult job. You deal with much complexity every day. However good I thought I was, I think I needed to learn that there were other experienced people who had better ideas about what exactly I could do and couldn't do. And having those conversations are important because essentially, as a social worker, you are helping people through very difficult and challenging situations that could result in death potentially. And as a social worker, you need to be humble enough to say, like, I don't know everything and I need help. And for me, that consents process was a great lesson in learning to ask for help when I needed it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's interesting because I was going to ask you whether you felt. I mean, obviously, I imagine you probably would prefer not to have gone through the concerns process.
Yeah.
But it sounds like because of it, you did learn things that you wouldn't have done if you hadn't have had that experience.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So, just thinking now, looking back, obviously, it's over a year since you finished the course, and you got through the concerns processes, you passed your placement. You did really well in your degree, John. So what would your advice be to any future social work students who find themselves in the concerns process?
I mean, Andrew will probably tell you I don't think I got through the consent process like perfectly. I mean, in fact, like after the first one, there was the next one quite soon after. So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to advise, but I can say what helped for me. And what really did help was talking to someone. I think talking to you, Andrew, and just telling you sometimes like how frustrated I was with my supervisor, with my placement, how much I wanted to just stop it and quit, like basically. I think that was really helpful for me because it made me realize that, hey, like I'm not alone in this process and I could talk to someone about it. And that there are people around you who will support you through this process. So, I mean, for the student who's watching this right now, you might be feeling like nobody understands you. And that's perfectly fine because at the end of the day, this is a very painful process. But I think what you need to remember is that you're not alone on this process. I mean, there are people like me who come through the other side. There are people like Andrew, your supervisor, or even your tutor who want to help you to do better. I think my misconception was that my practice educator was out to get me. And that is false. Like, that is false. They put you through the consent process not because they want to fail you, but because they want you to be a better social worker. And I can honestly say that without the consent process, I would never be the social worker I am today. It clarified for me so many things I wanted with my own social work career. And it clarified for me about the fact that I didn't simply have to be a perfect social worker. Because I think that's the tendency for us as social workers. I mean, we play the hero role, we go in, we save people, and it's tempting to think like we're superhuman. But I think this process taught me that I'm not perfect. There are things to learn, and it's okay not to be perfect. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us at any stage of our careers. Yeah.
Okay, well, John, that was absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting to hear you reflecting on it a little time afterwards. When I know, it was very difficult at the time, but you did get through it, and I'm really glad overall it's been a positive experience for you. So, is there anything else you wanted to talk about, John, before we close the session?
Yeah, I guess in closing, right? I think whoever watching this, I think I just want you to know that as a social work student, you are doing a great work, and there are times when you might not feel that you're being appreciated for your work, and things like the consent process can make you feel like you are definitely not getting the right treatment for how much effort you're putting in. But at the end of the day, I think it's important really to understand why you're in this social work career. And for all of us, we have a different reason. And for me, I always remember a story that I want to share very quickly. So when I was in my second year of university, I got the chance to go to China to work with children who were abandoned. So they were found in like rubbish dumps on doorsteps or sometimes left on street corners. And many of them were found with disabilities like cerebral palsy, cleft lips, cognitive difficulties. And during that time, I always wondered what it felt like to be abandoned by your mom, to be told, hey, like mommy is going to come back, but then she never does. So during one afternoon when I was walking this boy with intellectual disabilities back to his room, I asked him, hey, do you miss mommy? And he said no. And I thought I heard wrongly. So quite stupidly, I asked again, like, do you miss mommy? And he said, no, I have friends and family here. And I think that is a very important thing, what he said. I have friends and family here. Later, when I went to his room, he only had a teddy bear and a suitcase under his bed. In the eyes of the world, he had nothing. But in his eyes, he had everything. And it's because there are people like you who are able to sit with people who are the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and the most disadvantaged in society. So whatever difficulties you go through as a social worker, and I'm definitely sure that you will, I hope that you remember that the work you're doing is making an impact in every person's life. So I hope that helps, and I'm so thankful, Andrew, for this opportunity to share with your students. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much for sharing so honestly about your experiences. I'm sure it'll be very helpful for other students in your position. Thank you, John. Wish you all the best for your future career. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.